Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host, Matt Addison. Tom Beattie is alongside me. Before we get stuck into the show, a reminder as ever that to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, you can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link also gives you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link with all of the information on that is in the podcast episode description box below. Well, Tom, it's been quite the week for Liverpool. Another win in the Champions League. A big day for Darwin Núñez. He didn't quite build on that against Lille, but it's been another good couple of performances, really. There's been a lot of talk about whether Liverpool are the best team in the world, which we'll come to. But just in terms of the results this week, it's felt like a big step in the right direction in terms of competing on all fronts and really underlining, I should say, their title credentials.
Yeah, definitely. I think last time we spoke, I think we were coming off the back of a 1-1 draw with Forest. And I think kind of over the sort of Christmas and early January period, it was a bit of a sticky period for Liverpool, wasn't it? There was kind of a succession of results there where, obviously, quite a few draws in there. And there were a couple of question marks about sort of how Liverpool were going to fare maybe in the second half of the season, but it felt as though certainly that Brentford win, it felt like a massive milestone for me in the season to win so dramatically, and obviously Darwin as well coming up with the 2 goals late on. Yeah, it did feel like a massive moment in the season, and I think it certainly provided a bit of a springboard, I think, coming into the Lille game. And yeah, there seemed to be a lot more kind of patience, certainly within the ground. And I think just in terms of the overall performance as well against Lille, even at one point in the game, obviously, they were able to draw it level with Jonathan David. But I think overall, I always felt that Liverpool would go on and win. And certainly when they went down to 10 men, I felt it was only a matter of time before Liverpool got the job done, and that's what they were able to do. But yeah, I think the results in the past kind of week, I think they've suggested to me that Liverpool, they're here to stay really in terms of challenging for them 2 big trophies, I think. So, it's been really promising, I think. And just to kind of silence the doubters as well, I think sometimes is quite important at these little stages during the season. So, yeah, I think it's been a big week for Liverpool.
Yeah, I think that's especially important in the January transfer window where we don't expect Liverpool to be doing a great deal. I think it will be quite easy, maybe more so online than in the ground, but I think it does kind of overlap to a certain extent, and it can creep in inside Anfield, just in terms of if maybe 1 or 2 things haven't gone their way, then Diogo Jota gets injured, then maybe there's a couple of other tricky things that might happen before the window closes. I think that maybe gives people a bit more of an opportunity to moan, or maybe just be a little bit more worried and a bit more concerned, really. But I think that's kind of where I'm at, the same as you, really. I feel like Liverpool are in a good place at the moment. I think, the Champions League record speaks for itself. It was a bit of a shame that Barcelona came back and managed to win so that they couldn't secure that top spot. But, to be 7 wins out of 7 going to PSV without really any pressure on them next week. You look at where Manchester City were recording this before they play PSG. You look at where those 2 teams are. You look at where Real Madrid are. You look at, Lille have beaten Atletico Madrid. I mean, Liverpool made light work of a team which is on a 21 match or was on a 21 match unbeaten streak. It just kind of showed to me really that they are a level above, and it was good to see a few different players play well as well. I think Jarell Quansah, that was comfortably the best that he's played. Harvey Elliott obviously scores maybe a slightly fortunate deflected goal, but I thought he played pretty well in that game, was excellent off the bench at Brentford as well. It sort of feels to me like there's maybe 1 or 2 extra players there that, not that Liverpool haven't had them earlier in the season, but they've maybe not used them as much. Elliott and Quansah, Federico Chiesa as well, I'd probably put into that category. It feels like there's a few more options now for Arne Slot.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like you touched upon there, Liverpool have kind of given themselves that bit of a gift, haven't they, through winning all 7 games so far in the Champions League. It's almost not a night off, because I think from a competitive point of view, they'll want to top the group phase. But that PSV game, it gives the manager the opportunity to maybe rotate a little bit. And like you say, there are their options that we saw last night coming off the bench. I was particularly delighted for Harvey Elliott. He was able to come on, and we know that this season's been a little bit stop-start for him in terms of injuries, but I think he's a player who certainly showed in, that final season under Klopp the amount of minutes that he was able to put in across that season. He's going to be really useful, I think, to Arne Slot in the second half of this season. And for him to get the goal, albeit, a deflected shot, but you could see the joy on his face, couldn't you? To be able to score at the Kop end as well. I think that was his first ever European goal, wasn't it? In front of the Kop. So, and you could see in the interviews after the game as well, how sort of delighted he was to get off the mark in that regard as well. So, yeah, he's certainly going to be an option, I think, second half of the season. I thought Endo again off the bench, he's kind of a safe pair of hands, really, isn't he, when he comes into that midfield role. And the fact he can kind of, drop further back and that sort of thing, I think that gives the manager a massive option as well. He's never really put a foot wrong for Liverpool, and I think he showed last night again, really kind of a sure performance off the bench. And Federico Chiesa as well, I thought he was really bright, and the shot for the offside goal that got chalked off for Nunes, I thought he created a really nice opening for himself there, and he showed a little bit of trickery, didn't he, down that left-hand side. So again, that's another option, I think, for the manager. And I think a lot of people have remarked upon it sort of past couple of weeks. Obviously, you said about, people saying that it's the best team in the world. I think it's possibly overall the best squad in the world, isn't it? And I think that's what it comes down to, really. And I think that's the reason why Liverpool are flying high in the Premier League and in Europe at the moment. They are able to kind of rotate, and there's not that massive drop-off in terms of options, I think. So, yeah, I think last night kind of showed that, I thought, in abundance as well. That Liverpool got so many options off the bench, and I felt every substitution last night made a contribution as well, because it was a tough game. Like you said before, I think they were 21 games unbeaten coming into the game, Lille. So, they're a team that they're very difficult to break down, and they're quite good on the counter-attack as well. But I think Liverpool stemmed that really well second half, and they were able to get the results I think they deserved over the course of the 90 minutes. So, yeah, it was a proper squad effort, I felt. And, it's going to bode well, I think, moving into the knockout stages of the Champions League as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important, isn't it, that, we do look at it in that context of it being a squad effort. We mentioned how good Lille have been. I think, if Liverpool needed to win that game by 3 or 4, they definitely had the capabilities of doing it. It felt a bit like they were in second gear. I saw Stephen Warnock was on commentary, I think, for the BBC, and he kind of said something similar, where it kind of felt like Liverpool just cruised to a victory, which, you'd look at Lille and think, well, yeah, okay, Liverpool might be able to do that. But again, you have to look at the teams that they've beaten. They're third in the French division, obviously behind PSG, and I think behind Marseille as well. But they're a good team. They're better than a lot of Premier League teams that Liverpool will play this season. They're a team that's got good quality. I think Jonathan David will get himself a good move in the summer when he's available on a free. Obviously scores the goal, but I think they only had 3 or 4 shots. That was one of them that was fairly clear cut. But Liverpool, dominant, controlled. In a game like that, I think we probably shouldn't underestimate. Actually, that is very impressive for Liverpool to have done that.
Yeah, definitely. And it was tricky at points, wasn't it? And I think that, it goes back to the performances of a lot of the players who were out there last night. I thought Jarell Quansah, like you said before, I thought he had a magnificent game, and that kind of served a reminder of what he's capable of as well. He's come in for a little bit of criticism, and we struggled to get in the team so far this season, particularly after sort of the first game of the season. He came off at half time, and he struggled for minutes after that, but I felt it was his best performance of the season so far against Lille, and I was really impressed. He was able to come out with the ball quite often, and we saw that with Joel Matip down the years, that kind of brings another aspect to the game for Liverpool, doesn't it? And it was nice to see that again, a player kind of stepping into midfield. And Van Dijk again, he was his usual imperious self, and I thought the 2 fullbacks as well, there's been a lot of question marks over the first choice fullbacks, if you like, obviously Trent Alexander-Arnold and Andy Robertson, but they're two kind of understudies, played really well last night as well, in Conor Bradley and obviously Kostas Tsimikas as well. So I thought it was just a great all-round performance. I thought the midfield was really settled. Curtis Jones with the ball for the assist, I thought was sublime. And I know Mo Salah commented on that, didn't he, after the game as well in his interview. And we saw with the running from Dominic Szoboszlai as well. You know, he showed that all season long. And I think, again, that's one of the big reasons that Liverpool are in the position they're in now. So, yeah, I just felt across the park, you know, the forward line as well. We've mentioned the players who were able to come into the game in the second half. And, yeah, I just felt overall it was a great performance from Liverpool. And, yeah, things are looking really positive at the moment. And to be able to come out of a game like that against a team who played really well on the night and they've got a great record so far this season. I think I read about the manager. I think he's beaten Pep, Jose Mourinho and Carlo Ancelotti before today. So, again, he's someone who showed his kind of, you know, his qualities through what he's been able to do so far in his managerial career as well. So, yeah, I thought it was really tough task for Liverpool and I thought they came through it really well.
Yeah, you could tell that they were well coached. They were well set up. They've got a few good players, but you know, you could also tell that Liverpool were just a level above them. And I think that kind of leads into the wider question, really, of this podcast, which started the idea really around Thomas Frank. He said it after Liverpool had beaten Brentford. I wonder, possibly there might be an element of Thomas Frank saying to his players, look, you've held the best team in the world for 90 minutes there and you're only, you know, losing that game in stoppage time. But I do think there is a large amount of evidence as well that Liverpool are very much, you know, right up there in terms of that conversation. Jonathan David said it yesterday. Arne Slot was asked about it and he tried to play it down a little bit, as you'd expect him to. He pointed to Bayern Munich and Barcelona as being up there as well. But I think it is, you know, a genuine question to ask right now. Are Liverpool the best team in the world? I think they are definitely the best team in England. The Premier League table shows that. They've won 7 out of 7 in Europe. They've beaten Real Madrid, who is probably, you know, another one that you'd throw into that conversation along with Barcelona and Bayern Munich. I mean, it feels almost a little bit dramatic to ask the question, are Liverpool the best team in the world? And probably simultaneously, as Virgil van Dijk said yesterday when we spoke to him post-match at Anfield, he kind of said, well, it almost doesn't matter at this point if you're the best team in the world or not, because we've not won anything yet. But you know, it's a legitimate question, isn't it? Are Liverpool the best team in the world at the moment?
I think certainly statistically, you know, you look at, you know, they're obviously top of both the European and domestic standings at the moment. And I think it's important as well to note that, you know, they're still in the two kind of major domestic cups as well. So obviously they've got to the semi-finals of the League Cup. Obviously the second leg to come up against Tottenham, but they're also still in the FA Cup, which, you know, I think to fight on multiple fronts, we've seen down the years, no English team has been able to win all 4 pots, I think, you know, over the course of a season. But I guess in recent times, we were able to see a treble, weren't we, with Manchester City, and then obviously going back to 1999 with Manchester United, they were able to do it as well. So it's very rare, you know, it's once in a generation normally, I think, that a team is able to do that and win multiple trophies. And there may be a couple of twists along the way for Liverpool, but I think the omens are certainly looking really good for Liverpool in terms of being able to challenge for all of them trophies, and the squad size as well. You know, I go back to the point earlier that it's possibly the best squad in the world as well. It's not just about that first 11, it's the players who are able to come on and kind of supplement what Arne Slot's looking to do. And I feel, you know, you look at kind of the record in terms of goals scored. Liverpool have scored more goals than everyone in the Premier League so far, but they've also, I think most importantly, conceded the least as well. I think that's really telling. You know, I think, you know, it goes back to the old Alex Ferguson quote, doesn't it? A defence will win your titles. Obviously, I'm quoting him verbatim, but, you know, I think the point stands that, you know, it is about that, being able to keep it tight at the back and allowing your forwards to go on the attack and maybe do the job for you in that final third. And I think a lot of Arne Slot's philosophy has kind of been built upon that. And he saw kind of the fruits of his labour, I think, in terms of that tactical setup so far this season. It couldn't have really gone much better for him. And yeah, I think obviously to call him the best team in the world, I think Van Dijk was probably right there. it all depends upon sort of how Liverpool do in the second half of the season and how many of them big four trophies they're able to bring home. But yeah, I think they couldn't have done much better. Obviously, the Premier League, it throws up challenges every single week, doesn't it? And we've seen it in kind of the past 10 games, haven't we? The run Liverpool have had, it hasn't been plain sailing. There's been games like the Forest game away from home, the United game at home. And then you can throw in games, obviously, like the West Ham 5-0 and, the Leicester City 3-1 as well. So they're being both sides of the coin, really, in terms of them performances. But I think consistency has been there with Liverpool so far this season. And we already kind of know what to expect from a Slot team as well, which I think identity is a massive thing in football nowadays. So, yeah, I think at the moment, sort of based on statistics and based on current form, you can't really look much further past Liverpool in terms of the best team in the world. But again, time will tell, I think, and it all comes down to whether they're able to secure, hopefully from a supporter's point of view, the Premier League and even maybe the Champions League as well. But I think there is a long way to go. So, it's one of them where I think fans are going to have to strap in, I think, for the second half of the season and kind of remain hopeful the players are able to do the job.
Yeah, it could definitely be a busy second half of the season for us, which is good. Gives us plenty of things to talk about on the podcast, which is never a bad thing. I think it is important, isn't it, to sort of look at that squad and how they use that squad. We've spoken about a few players who kind of come to the fore recently. They are going to have to do that. And obviously the obvious question when we talk about how good the Liverpool squad is, and we've just both said there that we think it's probably the best squad, and that's almost more important really than having the best first 11. You need to have players who can come in when there's injuries and things like that. I mean, in terms of that, I'm sure there'll be people screaming to say we've got to get somebody in the January transfer window. You've got to sign a certain player, and obviously we have talked a little bit about that in previous podcasts in terms of things that we'd like Liverpool to do. But I think it's probably important to mention as well that none of the other teams are perfect. I think if you asked any football fan of any team in the world, they'd probably say that, you need to sign this player or that player. So do you think Liverpool, even without any signings, are still in a position that they can go on and challenge on all four fronts this season? Or does it depend on maybe if they can get one in? It's obviously not likely, and we don't expect them to do that at this point in the January window. But, can they do that without bringing in an extra player is I suppose what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one to answer because I think like you said there, you can look at the great teams down the years and on kind of a squad level, you can always argue that there's a couple of positions where, you should be looking to strengthen. We kind of mentioned before, great teams of the past or the past 20, 30 years. You even look at the Centurions team. The Liverpool were up against, pretty much every year, weren't they, in terms of that tussle for the Premier League title under Jurgen Klopp. And, they were able to get one title on the board, but, over Jurgen Klopp's 7 or 8 years, for how good that Liverpool team was, and they were able to conquer Europe. It was only one Premier League title that they were able to win. So, yeah, the competition is always fierce, I think. And, there are only so many great players that any one team can have. And I think that's maybe one of the problems Liverpool got as well. You kind of look at the options they've got in the squad. You could argue maybe they go out into the market and spend kind of the market rate for a midfielder or even a fullback. But whether they're actually going to come in and hit the ground running and sort of improve what Liverpool are doing now, the question still remains in terms of whether they're able to do that. So I think that's always the difficult thing. And, it's whether a player will settle within them 6 months if you are chasing for a title or obviously the Champions League as well. It is always difficult to kind of work out how a player would do. And I think that's maybe the thing that sort of the recruitment team and Arne Slot will be kind of juggling nowadays in the heads, I think, in terms of whether to add players to what they've got already. And we've spoken previous weeks whether maybe the left-back position would be somewhere to target. And I think in an ideal world, Liverpool would go out and get a left-back and maybe even a defensive midfield player. You look at the amount of minutes that Gravenberch has already got in the tank so far this season. He played again last night and, you do kind of worry a little bit in terms of injuries and that sort of thing. And, whether Liverpool have got them kind of options kind of, behind, the likes of Gravenberch, whether there's a like-for-like player there, and I felt in previous weeks that when Dominic Szoboszlai hasn't been on the pitch, maybe that the legs haven't been there in midfield a little bit. But I think, it's difficult to kind of earmark a player in Europe who could come in and sort of improve them positions. So I think the temptation for Liverpool would maybe be to actually stick with what they've got right now, keep a tight squad. Pep Guardiola's been very open in the past about that, the importance of keeping a squad tight and the amount of minutes that you can give to players is always very finite for a coach. So, yeah, I think the manager will kind of have that in the back of his mind as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool don't make a signing in January. Obviously, I'm not privy to any information either way, on that. But I think just in terms of looking at it from a common sense point of view, maybe it might be a case of kind of keeping things tight and keeping that squad as it is now, and maybe getting to the end of the season and maybe assessing their options after the end of the season. But yeah, in an ideal world, obviously, I think you'd maybe go out and get a defensive midfielder, a left back, and maybe even a striker, given the injury, or the injuries that we've seen to Diogo Jota over the course of the season. But yeah, I think at the moment there's a lot of options at every position pretty much. And you can kind of make a case for the likes of Endo, for example, in defensive midfield. And obviously there's two senior options at left back as well. So I think Liverpool are well stocked. But yeah, I think time will tell whether it's the right decision or not to make a signing or not. But yeah, it's one of those, I think, where, you'll look back with hindsight, I think, at the end of the season, and you'll only kind of know the answer at that point, I think.
Yeah, I think we mentioned on last week's podcast that Jamie Carragher had suggested that, Liverpool need to go and get, I think he said a left back or maybe a defender more generally. But I mean, even the sort of pattern that we were seeing maybe a week or two ago where Liverpool, I think I'm right in saying it was 5 of 7 or maybe 6 out of 8 games in the Premier League before that, they'd gone a goal behind, and obviously it had to then come from behind. They'd done that in lots of games to go on and win. I think they went behind to Leicester, but then still won the game. Obviously went behind to Forest and didn't quite manage to do that. But, even that in the last couple of games, they've looked a little bit more defensively solid. Obviously against Brentford, they were able to keep them out and keep a clean sheet, and then obviously then move into the Champions League and didn't really give away a great deal apart from the goal that was scored, which was at a point in the game where it was a bit of a surprise to everyone, really. It kind of came out of nowhere. It does feel like Liverpool have got probably enough options just about to do that. But then, like you say, maybe in the summer can possibly reassess that and have a bit of a more long-term think about it then, because there's only so many bodies that you can have. Ideally, yes, you'd sign a left back, but are you realistically going to have 3 left backs on the books for the rest of the season? Probably not. I think that's probably unrealistic to think that that's going to happen. So it is interesting, isn't it? It's going to be a talking point, I'm sure, over the next week or so. I'm sure it'll be something that we talk about again on the podcast with the games coming thick and fast, and I'm sure there will be injuries and things like that. But because it's a Champions League week, I'll finish with a question on the Champions League. I mentioned 10 or 15 minutes ago about Arne Slot saying that Barcelona and Bayern Munich were right up there in terms of being in that conversation for the best team in the world. We've both mentioned Liverpool as being obvious contenders for it as well. But how many teams do you think are there in the Champions League this season that can win it, apart from Liverpool?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think the manager was correct, with the 2 teams that he did mention. We know, looking back over previous years, that, even when Liverpool have been riding high and they've maybe been among the favourites, there's always a draw that can come up where, it does kind of bring up difficulties for Liverpool. I'll always remember the Atletico Madrid one. Obviously, they were able to knock out Liverpool kind of, coming off the back of, I think it was the title winning season, wasn't it? So, yeah, I think even the best Liverpool teams, they've come up against teams in the past where, they have been able to cause them problems. And yeah, looking at Barcelona, they've been pretty imperious in the Champions League so far, only 1 loss. And obviously that comeback victory last night that you mentioned earlier as well, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with, I think, in Europe this season. Atletico Madrid, again, they're always a team, I think, with Simeone where, they bring their own kind of set of difficulties for an opponent, don't they? And I think if you were to be drawn up against them sort of in the latter rounds of the Champions League, there would always be that grain of doubt, I think. They've always had a good record up against Liverpool. And then obviously even the English teams, I think, Arsenal, we know what they're capable of. I think over 2 legs, it'd be very interesting to see Liverpool up against them, how they do. I know obviously Liverpool drew away at the Emirates in the Premier League early in the season, didn't they? And I think it's interesting as well, Atalanta, who obviously knocked out Liverpool in the Europa League last season, didn't they? They're riding high in the Champions League standing so far. They're 4th in that kind of top 8 category. So, yeah, it's a difficult one. And obviously then you've got the usual sort of leading lights of Europe, haven't they? Bayern Munich, for example, that they're always a team that you want to avoid. I think in the Champions League, they've obviously got a great record. And then Real Madrid, obviously Liverpool beat them earlier in the season. But I think, again, over 2 legs, it would be difficult for any team, I think, obviously having to go away to the Bernabeu and everything that comes with that. So there's a lot of teams in there still, I think, that Liverpool are going to have to come past. And I guess that's the beauty of European competition and the Champions League, especially, that you're coming up against the best teams in Europe. And it's always a trophy that, if you do win it, you always deserve to win. I think, it is the best cup competition in the world, isn't it? And, I think it's going to be really exciting. I think, it's a new format, but I think once we get into the knockout stages, it'll kind of be back to normal, I think, in terms of what to expect from the Champions League. And I think there'll be a few kind of tasty ties in there, I think, in the knockout. So I'm looking forward to that as a fan. And yeah, I'm kind of bracing myself to see who Liverpool come up against in that round of 16 later on in the season. But yeah, I think there's a lot of teams in there still who could cause Liverpool problems. But I think overall, just kind of looking at how Liverpool have done so far, I think they can very much consider themselves to be, right up amongst the favourites for the Champions League this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've, discussed plenty on this podcast that would point towards there being plenty of evidence really of that being the case. And we don't quite know, or certainly I haven't got my head around how the seeding and how all the rest of the competition works. But like you say, it should be slightly more familiar by the time we get to that point. We'll have a bit more of an idea of what the path is. I think it would be fair to say when Liverpool won the Champions League last time, that was, in part at least because they had a decent run and they had a couple of teams in that competition. It does always come down to the draw and things like that. But as Thomas Frank, Jonathan David and plenty of other people have mentioned, Liverpool very much up there at the moment. I think as much as there's maybe 1 or 2 teams that Liverpool wouldn't want to face, probably those teams wouldn't want to face Liverpool even more than that. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting second half of the season, I'm sure. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more next week as well when Liverpool have played PSV and the group stage is over. There might be 1 or 2 big teams even who get knocked out with the competition by that point. We'll know, obviously, by then what the PSG against Manchester City score was. That will be an interesting one to sort of see where those 2 teams are going to end up. And yeah, 1 or 2 teams with work to do, but Liverpool very much boxed off with a game in hand and guaranteed a top 2 spot already. But yeah, I think that will do us for this week. We'll leave it there. So thank you for Tom for joining me. Thank you to everyone who's watched and listened along to the podcast as well. It is always appreciated. And as I say, we'll be back next week with the next Liverpool.com podcast.